Good morning, everyone. I totally skipped playing the intro, so people might not know what this is. So I'm going to throw it up real quick. Yeah, I'm professional like that. Today, we're exploring the theme of compassion, which, I mean, is not that provocative of an idea for most people. I mean, Compassion International I think it's one of those organizations where you send a little bit of money in and they send you a picture of an impoverished kid from somewhere else in the world. Everyone says they're about compassion. Everyone from, I don't know, the far left end of the spectrum, anarchists like Peter Kropotkin was probably in favor of compassion. Uh, you know, Ho Chi Minh, Stalin, and then on the other end of the political spectrum, I'm sure Adolf Hitler liked compassion. It's one of those generic terms that you can pour whatever you want into it. Anytime you feel warm towards somebody else in some sort of piteous way, you could call it compassion. Um, but to me, it's an important idea that needs unpacking. And so I want to talk about that today and how it differs from other similar overlapping terms like solidarity or charity. And when you add those sorts of words and put it next to compassion, then all of a sudden compassion starts to be not just about interior feelings that you feel some sort of need to express in some sort of kindly way, but starts to ask, in what kind of way? And what is the relationship between these warm feelings and how I perceive the cause of the pain that I'm responding to? Because compassion, and it's like, and words don't like work this way. You don't define words based upon their etymology. Words are defined by their use. Nevertheless, it is illustrative to understand that compassion means to suffer with. Passion, we usually use in more of a erotic sort of way, that you feel stirred and feel like energized. But there's a reason we call it the passion of the Christ. Passion in its older sense means suffering. And we've expanded out that meaning to include any strong, big feels that have intensity. But in calm means with. So to suffer with. Now, it raises this question of what does it mean to suffer with someone else who suffers? In our society, we tend to privilege interior, our not only our feelings and our thoughts, but our intentions. We have this flawed assumption that at any given time when we act, it's driven by a single intention, and that intention is informed by thoughts and feelings. That's why if someone does something that in some kind of way that's shitty, and they will appeal to their intentions as a way of getting them off the hook, as though I didn't mean to do that. Well, at any given moment, we have multiple intentions, some of which we're aware of and some of which we're not. And we act out of those intentions, but the range of actions that we can take is limited. And so it's worth interrogating our inner world and then also how that shows up in our actions. If we're going to be compassionate, if we're going to notice the suffering of other people, the struggle of other people, and come alongside them and act, it's good to think about what we're doing and how it impacts not only the recipient, but also how it impacts us and then impacts our social system, which is why it's important to talk about things like solidarity. Solidarity is another word that has to do with like solid. This is the etymology. There's a stability, and that has to do with oneness. It's a unity that's stabilizing. It's a block. It's a block of action. So usually most people in our society kind of inherit the use of that word through union movements. Solidarity Forever is an anthem from the IWW and lots of unions. It means that we're going to work together as one cohesive unit to challenge the thing. So solidarity is, in a way, compassion in a more active political sense. And then charity used to mean, read the King James Bible, faith, hope, and love. It's taught faith, hope, and charity. Charity is the warm feels enacted in love. It's active, but charity has become seen as that sort of thing that we do to help someone out who's like a little in a piteous way. So in our society, we generally think compassion is a feeling, and then it works out through charity, which is this thing you do to help the down and out. If we think maybe they're deserving enough of it, or we think it's basic common decency, but we don't think about it in a politically active term like solidarity. So Kaylee's in the back room, and so I'm going to pull Kaylee up here, and so we can have a conversation about this. So yeah, breaking down terms. We kind of alluded to a lot of this on Monday, but it's really interesting because people want, because we live in a bifurcated world where church and spirituality is this thing and politics is over here, we tend to think of charity and compassion as kind of spiritual, kind of interior, warm feeling words. Solidarity is a political word. And so if you put those things next to each other, people get upset because you're politicizing something. As though politicizing something is always bad. But in my mind, in a world like ours, where people are actually suffering for political reasons, it is really horrifically bullshit to have an idea like compassion be seen as a non-political kind of idea. Because most suffering in our society, I think, is caused or at least exacerbated by political realities. So it's kind of interesting thing. Yeah. And no one likes being condescended upon. That's the other thing. Like, I don't know if I've been the recipient of charity before, and the warm feeling, it often smacks of that they're doing this for them. Like it's for their own warm feeling so they can feel good. I don't really necessarily usually feel that they're in it with me, which is, to me, that in it with is something that I think compassion points towards, and also that solidarity assumes. So yeah, Arnett says my audio is skipping for a reason. Maybe if I move the microphone closer to my face, it'll be better. Thanks for the heads up.
I think there's a little bit of a server connectivity issue between our broadcast or StreamYard and what's going to Facebook.
Yeah, I just got a notification that the connection dropped with one of the accounts this goes to. Hopefully it improves. Yeah, I don't want to exit it to try to alleviate those issues. Maybe I can do it from here. Maybe not. Nope.
Maybe.
I'll deal with it later. So hopefully
my video is really skipping.
Yeah, let me know, everyone who's watching. Give us feedback if it's somehow the issue continues. Because we want people to hear us. Yep, it seems like a streaming issue. I hope it's not bad, so that we can keep going. I mean, I think this will record, and we can always post it later.
Yeah, it has to be coming from StreamYard to where we're dropping it, because our connection into StreamYard is fine.
Yeah,
so, sorry, there's not really much we can do about it.
My assumption is, because your video's coming through okay, it's a little bit pixelated, not great, but I think it's functional enough from what I'm seeing. So hopefully the recording of this will come. I can download it and we can upload it because it's recording hopefully well. We'll see. I'll look at it afterwards. But yeah, this idea of compassion, I think, is an important one because it's such an abstracted idea, like love. Right? There's that Cornel West quote that justice is what love looks like in public. And then I think he maybe says tenderness is what it looks like in private. Compassion is, to me, usually understood as an interpersonal sort of thing. And justice is seen as a public thing. But to me, compassion and solidarity are twin terms in my mind. So they can go, they need to be enacted in a way that is at that interpersonal level. Otherwise, it's just, disembodied political action. And it also needs to scale up. Otherwise, it's just sentiment.
I think I kind of see the difference between solidarity and compassion to be kind of like a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle is not a square. Like like you can't have solidarity without compassion, but I do think that compassion extends outside of solidarity, because especially if we put things in like probably a too simplistic binary of the oppressed and the oppressor, like you can still have compassion for the oppressor, but you're not going to stand in solidarity. So it's like, yeah, I do think compassion. I'm sorry if I'm like throwing off your like your point here, but I do think that compassion kind of extends a little bit more than solidarity. But like you said,
totally. And I like the square rectangle thing because if I'm a rich bastard and my friend who's a rich bastard has cancer, I have compassion about that. But the solidarity thing doesn't really fit that scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think that I do think compassion, like lived out, especially whenever we're talking about marginalized groups, and especially since we're going to be focusing on solidarity with LGBTQ plus people and religious institutions in this next year, for at least part of it. Like solidarity is basically like actually living into compassion. And I think that we kind of talked about that on Monday, where like charity is this thing of like you help out, but compassion is like this extra step of helping, but like putting yourself forward in a position that kind of goes more alongside, I guess.
Yeah, and to me the thing is, and this is a point that I think Arnett is getting at, and I want to kind of dovetail with this. Arnett writes 2 thoughts. If you have compassion, feeling strongly with, then the other person's feelings hopefully come first and faithfully, and that feeling expresses itself in action, solidarity, in fact. Otherwise, it's like that faith without works thing. And he goes on to say, Cayley makes an excellent point. Compassion with an oppressor need not manifest as solidarity, since acting in the oppressor's best interest would involve turning the oppression aside. And I think this sort of power dynamic and then how it shows up in a system is really important. And to me, the thing I want to kind of have us think about is like the flow that compassion takes. So when we see Jesus saying that, he's stirred, he has compassion for someone and he heals them, he might have compassion towards the powerful in some kind of way, but it doesn't look the same. And there's this tendency in our society to want to flatten everything. So that people adopt this sort of mythic center, both sidesism, like what about Elon Musk's feelings kind of thing, as though when you're talking about things like solidarity and systems, that somehow the term compassion itself, the way we think about it in this flattened way, is enough. This sort of like toxic version in my mind of personalism, that idea that really people as a category don't exist the same way as the person in front of you does. So you have to attend to what's in front of you, like in a very primacy of the person. It doesn't have to be could be understood in a collectivist way, but I think a lot of people end up becoming weirdly libertarian about their understanding of compassion, so that they're leery of talking about any sort of political response. And it's hard because when you talk politics, it gets abstract. People don't like abstract. We're not really wired for it. We are wired to notice the pain of the person in front of us, unless it's conditioned out of us. So it's really becomes this issue of like, if we're going to talk about spirituality and religion and things like that, and how that shows up in the world through compassion and mercy and love, and we don't talk about the political stuff, then it's just like Arnett says, it's like that faith without works thing, which is so much of that shit. So you end up seeing a lot of people post stuff on Trans Day of Remembrance, but not checking in on their trans friends in any sort of concrete way. Same for all the other days of remembrance and months, Black History Month. Everyone throws their stuff up, but then it's like gets all sad, and grumpy feeling whenever people protest, and it goes some kind of way.
Also, speaking of all the days of remembrance, there's an intersex Day of Remembrance, which is earlier in November, and most people don't know about it. And
I didn't know about it.
I was actually going to post about it on CPI, and I forgot. This is what happens when I don't put things in my calendar. But yeah, like that. I mean, that's one of those things. So like there is the thing of like getting conditioned out of like having compassion for the person in front of you, but then like the more radical idea is to have compassion for people that you don't always see in front of you, which is a little bit different of yeah, it's like an intentional way of having compassion. And I think Intersex Day of Remembrance reminds me of that, because I as much as I want to be in solidarity with other people, the truth is it has to be proactive, and that's harder. Like in a way, our society is not necessarily set up to work that way. And I don't know that I mean that could honestly be more of an evolutionary type thing. Is like you're supposed to worry about your tribe first, other than other people. But that's also kind of the radical side of Jesus, is like, yeah, sure, we had tribal mentality, but how about we actually do a little bit better? So
yeah, and there's so many nuances to that almost seem engineered, but like my sense is that powerful people don't have to engineer oppressive systems. They just naturally like develop with the right kinds of input. So like you don't need to have these billionaires being intentionally nefarious for their power system to be nefarious intrinsically. So but like little things like yeah, I think our brains don't do well with abstraction and people we don't see in front of us, right? And we do with the people in front of us. And so the best way to then, if you were going to engineer a system that allowed for the maximum amount of oppression, you have to invisibilize the suffering of people. So, and we see that systemically. So part of it is, if anybody wants to nerd out, look up infrahumanization studies. So infrahumanization is the process by which, psychologically we dehumanize people. So it's the interior state of dehumanization. And so they've done these studies on measuring the activity of the medial prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that lights up when you see a human face, showing different people these images, stereotypical images of different kinds of people. And they find that it does not light up when looking at stereotypically homeless looking faces or immigrant looking faces, right? And that's not that we're necessarily biologically evolved to ignore homeless people. It's that what needs to happen for us to like short circuit that before it becomes a cognitive thought, precognitive, is just we have to have the disgust mechanism has to come first. So if you can be conditioned to be disgusted with certain types of people, it'll override your ability to recognize fundamentally their humanity. And the only way around that is to start leaning in to recognizing people's humanity. So it takes an intentional practice. So like that's one thing. And then just all the ways that our social are every time a city bulldozes a tent city to keep them out of like whenever interstates are built through like black neighborhoods to break it up so that people don't see, like hiding and bracketing. And so just a great text that I recommend by Dorothy Zola. Her book Suffering talks about middle class consciousness, which I would also include as part of white consciousness, is kind of a pathology of apathy, where we have an inability to suffer because with other people, because we've so habituated the avoidance of suffering in ourselves and
Mhm.
others as a social thing, like that we're going for. And so even theology has shifted towards more of that coping wellness model, whereas in different times, um, spirituality was about suffering well, which we can critique that, we should, how that shows up. But we have all these systems that point us away from recognizing the humanities of the people who are actually in front of us every day. So we don't even have to like have it become too abstracted. Our social systems do that, like even for the people right in front of us.
Mhm.
So more comments from Arnett. Like Terry Pratchett said, I think perhaps the most important problem is that we are trying to understand the fundamental workings of the universe via a language device for telling one another when the best fruit is.
Yeah.
Terry Pratchett. Language matters with all this, which is why we're spending so much time talking about specific words, not because we
Mhm.
want to redefine it in some sort of draconian way, but because we want to like interrogate how we understand these concepts in our lives. Arnett also says it is purely a practical matter to recognize that since the planet has gotten so small and space around it has gotten so large, our tribe extends to all humanity and potentially all life on this little blue marble.
And
Now,
I forget the term of it, but there's actually there's an area of study that sees life on Earth as um not as an organism, but like kind of like an organism, where it is all working together to sustain and bring forth life on like the planet. So it's a really interesting concept. But I also find that uh, like the idea of the tribe to like what am I trying to say? Um, there's like a weird push right now to like remake tribes in a way. Like there's that book that came out, The Case for Christian Nationalism, where like the point of it is, or the point that the person is trying to make is like people do better whenever they are in groups of like people, and so we should follow and step into that. And it's like that
um,
there's so much wrong with that. And to claim Christianity as part of that is like that's a little that's a little problematic. Um,
it's ugh.
it's
I mean,
gross.
yeah, yeah. I mean, like, I get it. Like, people having commonality is kind of part of a glue of community.
Yeah, of
So, I mean, I think that's kind of a basic anthropological recognition. But then to say,
course.
like, therefore, white Christian nationalism, it's like you don't have to pick those ones. I have
Hmm.
solidarity and community with all kinds of people who don't fit into who don't fit into my category,
Yeah.
who aren't, white Christian trans people, which is a small, disproportionately small community these days, more and more, which makes sense. I have a need to build community with queer folk for that solidarity reason, but at the same time, I'm not going to I exclude people because of shitty ideas and toxic behavior from my definition of what is possible as community, not based upon like some sort of weird fascistic set of categories of authoritarian descriptors. That's gross.
I mean, it's also like, hey, we don't want we don't want to have to like recognize our own shit, so we just gonna kick out everybody else that like makes us feel uncomfortable that like we're shitty people. That's because that's like really what the issue is like these like Christian people that want to have their way on everything, and there's like other people that exist in the world that are like, hey, no, that's actually kind of harmful and hurtful and maybe you shouldn't do that, and they're like, no, I don't want to. And so the solution is this Christian nationalism that apparently there's a case for enough to write a book, and
Mm-hmm.
apparently it's a long book. I haven't read it. I do not recommend buying it. Please don't send this person money.
Here's what you do with it. You shoplift it and then use it to make 1 year. I did this. I wanted to make this an annual thing. There's a total like rabbit trail. But 1 year I took a bunch of economic texts and copies of things like printed off copies of the Declaration of Independence and weird shit, and made a giant paper mache golden calf for 4th of July party, backyard 4th of July party. And so like a paper mache pinata of the golden calf. And so the idea is we gather together, beat the shit out of Mammon, and then have like meet around the fire and gather around the fire and talk about revolution. And so that was like, I wanted to do that as an every year thing. I think we did it twice. Yeah, we did it twice. But that would be a good, if you shoplift that book and use the pages of that for part of your paper mache pinata of the golden calf party, which I wanted to make a thing. That's an idea for everyone. Be crafty about how you shoplift the book, though.
There you go.
Yeah, don't get caught. Yeah, I know. I recommend some things sometimes that are not legal. So, speaking of recommendations, if you're shoplifting like evil books, you might have more money in your pocket than you would if you bought them. So, you should consider supporting the work of CPI with that money you saved. Let me do the pull this up here. Well, actually,
the little advertisement.
Yeah, I unloaded that. So if you go to the website on the bottom here, prophetikimagination.org, there's some information. There's a video about our current and 3-phase plan for the future that you can take a look at. And we're been doing fundraising. It's fundraising season. I think I don't know the total tally, but we're more than halfway to our $20,000 goal.
If my math is right, I think we might almost be 3/4 of the way, which would be amazing. Yeah,
and so our goal, one of the other goals though, is to have 25 new reoccurring donors, and we're not very far on that one. That kind of month to month like stuff you can bank on is really important for a small nonprofit in particular, so that we know how to budget based on what we think is going to come in for that year. So we really need support, and just to make it really, just to put it out there, we've put more energy into fundraising this year than we have in the past, and it's harder going largely because we've lost donors because of the whole trans thing. People try to tell me it could be a bunch of, I know there are other factors, but I know the list of donors we've had and this list of donor we have now, and I note some trends. And I'm not going to say that supporting us is like supporting trans liberation necessarily. There's a couple more dots to connect in there, but it's not that far off. Like supporting organizations that are led by marginalized people is a great move. And the work we're doing directly is addressing toxic sorts of spirituality that contribute to this shit. And we're trying, in the new year, we're going to be pushing for a call to solidarity with queer folks in light of backlash. It's like a thing we want to put a lot of energy into, and we won't be able to if we don't have our budget. We both are paid half the time, part-time.
The cats are fighting behind me.
Nice. So please support our work if you are able. Every little bit counts, and share what we're doing. Maybe in the next episode on Friday, I want to maybe talk about a couple of our programs that we, I have a class coming up in January. Maybe I should talk a little bit about that. And then also talk about our 2-year spiritual direction program, which we're taking applications. And maybe we can just break down some of the things we're doing a little bit more.
I just realized I need to promote that a little bit more, the registration for.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that later. I was going to put up some stuff. So do you have a ghost?
Oh, it's the cats. They're like below the camera, and they're.
I would like the idea of it being ghosts better, but
sure, it's ghosts.
Okay, ghost cats.
And we'll put it out there. If you are listening to this and you are thinking of being a sustaining member, we have discussed like access to some of our stuff, like Or like the inaction planner that we're coming out with, the Rhythms of Revolt. Because if you're going to be given to us every month, then maybe you should get a book out of it or something. So
Yeah,
just
like
throwing
these are
that out there.
cool resources that we're putting out that we want to share, and we will share with sustaining members in some format. But yeah, I think this is a pivotal time. And I get, like, I've had, I don't want to we're past time. A lot of people are deconstructing. I just saw this new poll from the UK that most people in British society are no longer Christian. They don't identify as Christian. So there's definitely people pushing back and reacting. And so it makes sense that some people would be like, why the hell are you even trying to do this Christianity, spirituality thing at all? I get that a lot. But when we talk about, it's not lip servicey, like us saying these sorts of things, and then we're secretly like really enmeshed in some kind of way where we want to enable and embolden Christianity. Like our relationship with Christianity is very, very subversive. We're not working for its survival. We're working for faithfulness to what we think of as Jesus has called a liberation, as we understand it. And that does not presuppose a healthy, vibrant, growing church. And so what we're doing here is like simultaneously about going deeper into spirituality, but in a way that assumes a very radical, subversive understanding of what liberation looks like in the world. And so, and there's, in that kind of Christian supremacist, toxic spirituality contributes to a lot of evil in the world. And if you don't like it, one way you can support the kind of the counter to it is by supporting CPI. It's what we're about. And if the more resources we get, the more we will expand into building networks with people who are like-minded to resource and support them in the work of liberation in a deep spiritual way. So our 3-phase plan video kind of gets into some of that. So check it out. It's on our Prophetic Imagination page, or link to it, at least links to GoFundMe where that is found. So even if you go to the GoFundMe just to see that video, I think it's worth it, just so you know what we're up to, so you can at least think about us in a way that supports what we're trying to do in the world. But money is also good.
Yeah, money's good.
So I think Friday, let's see what we're talking about Friday. Oh, fun. We're going to be talking about St. Francis and the Fraticelli, which is a nerdy, I have a book around here somewhere. The Fraticelli were the bandit revolutionary groups that were roving in the hills of Italy, inspired by St. Francis. So it's a tale of two compassions. So it's part of the backdrop for the book, Umberto Eco's Name of the Rose, if anyone wants to really nerd out about this. So check it out on Friday. It'll be a fun one. I like getting historically nerdy. With that, thanks everyone who tuned in now or after it was live. We'll be back on it Friday at 9 a.m. Central Standard Time. Adios.
Bye.